Good evening, everyone. I'm Claire Cohen, a journalist and author, and I am delighted to welcome you to this Telegraph Extra event. As this event is exclusive to you, Telegraph subscribers, I'd like to thank you for tuning in, and I hope you're as excited about the evening as I am. Before we begin, though, a little bit of housekeeping. You can make this video full screen and see our faces even bigger if you click on the box on the bottom right. You can submit questions. Just scroll down to the Q&A box and they'll be fed directly through to me, and I'll be asking our guest a few of them at the end of the evening. And don't worry, while you can see and hear absolutely everything that we do, we can't see or hear you at all. So you can go and get that cup of tea very quickly. So on with the show. It is a great pleasure and privilege this evening to welcome one of Britain's best-selling novelists. Since her first book, Playing Away, gripped the nation 2 decades ago, she has sold millions of books and become known for her provocative and compelling plot lines that tap into our deepest fears and ask some of the questions we're often too scared to confront. What makes good people do bad things? How well do we really know those closest to us? And what lies beneath that seemingly perfect life? Chilling stuff, I think you'll agree, and I can't wait to hear more about it, as well as her latest novel, which I've got here, One Last Secret. So without further ado, welcome Adele Parks MBE, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to be here. Very nice introduction.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, I just mentioned your MBE in my introduction, which you were awarded this year for services to literature. Has it sunk in yet, and how did you find out about it?
It was actually a very funny story. So in November, my son was traveling, studying at St. Petersburg University in Russia. And we were going to visit him in November and had to fill out a huge amount of paperwork. I mean, I really believe that there are clones of me somewhere in Russia because, they wanted to know things like my mother's maiden name and my bank account details and my social media accounts. It was insane. Anyway, while I was in Russia, I got this email saying, Adele Parks, the Queen would like to honor you with an MBE. And I thought it was spam. I thought it was something that had come because there was a link to click and that sort of thing. So I just deleted it. I didn't even mention it to my family while we were on this holiday. Came home, and then throughout December, I received this email a couple of times, which actually only made me think it was definitely spam instead of thinking, well, it's possibly true. And it was only on the very last day when you can apparently accept or decline. My agent rang me and said, Adele, you're being so rude. It's really not like you, because I'm a very polite human being. Why haven't you responded to this? Mortifying. So I nearly missed it altogether because I just couldn't believe that anybody had sort of noticed what I was doing and what I was up to. So it's terrific. It's really exciting.
Oh, that's fantastic. When you hear it, have you got used to it? Or when I've said it in the introduction, are you thinking, are they talking about somebody else?
I haven't really got used to the idea. And I never know if it is going to be used or not. And I don't think I'm yet at the stage where I would insist on saying, oh, it's Adele Parks MBE. But I do think it's been the most exciting, unexpected thing of my career, actually. A lot of things that have been incredibly exciting in my career, and I've been very lucky to have many, many of those. But I've worked for them and I've known they were coming, or I've known that I could possibly achieve them. This just came out the blue, and I'm thrilled.
Oh, well, I think it's a wonderful achievement, and I couldn't not use it in my introduction. So
Thank you.
let's rewind very briefly, because just over 2 decades ago, I mentioned you published your first novel, but prior to that, you just finished a degree in English. You were working in the advertising industry. So how did you make the jump from that into publishing your first book?
Yes, I always wanted to be a writer from being a little girl. In fact, it was a librarian that suggested to me that I could be an author. So I'm born and bred North Yorkshire, in Teesside in North Yorkshire. And I used to, on a regular basis, visit the tiny little village library. In fact, so frequently that this librarian did say, do you think one day you might become an author? And I was so young that I remember thinking, oh, I don't really know what that word is. And I remember the sort of shame of not knowing what the word meant, because I considered myself very reedy and very wordy. And she explained, she said, "Oh, I mean a writer." And she rushed away to get an Enid Blyton book, showed me the cover of the Enid Blyton book. And there was a signature of Enid Blyton, as you know, I'm sure you know, you've seen it. And she said, "You see, there's a lady sat at home writing these books for you." So first of all, I thought Enid Blyton really was just writing for me for many, many years until I wised up. But secondly, it was the first time I'd made the connection between somebody could create a book. Somebody came up with this idea. I don't know before that how I thought books came into existence. I don't think I thought about the storyteller. So from being about 6 or 7 year old, I wanted to be a writer. Had no idea how to go about it, and didn't come. I mean, I always joke that the very first author I met was myself, and that's absolutely true. I mean, so I had no idea how to go about becoming an author. So after I graduated, I taught in Italy for a while. I worked in London. Then I moved to Botswana. I had a couple of years in Botswana helping set up an advertising agency there. Really great adventures and great times. But all the time in the back of my mind, I wanted to be a writer. And I was writing every day. And I approached my 30th birthday. And there'd been enough things in my life by then that had, some of them good, some of them really not so good, that I thought life's too short. And I laugh now because I look back at a 30-year-old and think they're children. But at the time, the 30-year-old seemed like, oh, there's a big birthday, you've got to achieve something. So when I was about 28, I started planning to write this book. I used to spend 3 hours 3 times a week and 5 hours one day at the weekend writing it, rewriting it. And then on the eve of my 30th birthday, I simply dropped the manuscript and a 10-word pitch into an agent I'd read about. I'd never met. I hadn't met any agents as well as any authors. Went back to North Yorkshire to celebrate my 30th. And when I returned at the end of the weekend, this will date me, but there was a sort of flashing red light on my answering machine. I didn't think I even had a mobile. And it was a message to say he liked the work and he wanted to take me on. So it was an absolute dream come true. It was a leap. I think I had a good pitch, probably because of my advertising years. I think I had self-edited for 2 years quite solidly. And yes, I was an incredibly lucky human being. He did take me on. He's a chap called Johnny Galler, who's now CEO of Curtis Brown, the oldest and biggest literary agency in the country. So we've sort of grown together and grown up together. And it's been amazing. So relatively simple transition, actually. Yeah.
I mean, not to take anything away from your pitch, but I did also read that you told a little porcupine when you submitted that manuscript.
I've probably told several. So the pitch was, I'd read about Johnny Geller, I'd researched him, and I'd read that he felt that authors rambled on and couldn't be succinct about their work. And really, he just had time for 10-word pitches. So I did a 10-word pitch, which was Anna Karenina meets Bridget Jones, but heroine gets to live. Very advertising-y. And that spoke to him because, you know, he thought, how does this person think the way I think? You know, how marvelous, finally. So that was a big tick. The less big tick, I said I gave the manuscript. I actually gave a third of the manuscript, which is more normal than giving an entire manuscript, a third of the manuscript and the 10-word pitch to him. And when he rang me on that, or left the message that I listened to on that Sunday evening, he said, call me back on Monday. And I called him on Monday and he said, so is it ready to go? Have you finished it? And I don't know why, because actually I am genuinely an honest person, but I think I just panicked and didn't want to let him down. I'm a bit of a people pleaser. And I said, yes, it's ready. But I can't get it to you because I'm going on holiday for 2 weeks. And then decided I would write the following 2/3 of the novel in 2 weeks. Took time off work. Yeah, I know, insane. Took time off work. Pulled everything together I had, which was chaotic and messy. And after the 2 weeks, sent it to him. And then I didn't hear back from him for several weeks. And I knew that there was a problem, but I couldn't quite face that I'd messed up. And rang, sent letters, eventually got hold of him again. And he sent a letter back saying, The first third was really encouraging. The pitch was really encouraging, but the second two-thirds seemed quite rushed. I suggest you try another agent because I think you've got enough here that other people would take you on, but it's not for me. But I remember thinking, oh, the man's a genius because it really was rushed and he's seen through me. So great. And I don't mind a bit of criticism. And I quite like someone calling me out and knowing more than I do. I'm very fine with that in life. So I actually just rang him back and fessed up, and he thought that was hilarious. Said, go away, write it properly. And I took another 2.5 months and then delivered it fully in the May. And within 6 days had signed a contract.
Wow. Well, I mean, that sort of work ethic, I think, has resonated throughout your career, as I'm sure some of our viewers tonight will know. Since then, you have written a book every year. And one last secret, which we're here to talk about tonight, is your 22nd book in 22 years, which, let me tell you, that sort of output, as somebody who has just slogged to produce her first book and has an absolute terror of even thinking about a second, is absolutely overawing. I mean, how do you do it, and why do you do it? What's driving you to do a book a year?
Um, well, I couldn't think of what else to do with my time if I wasn't writing. I think I am a workaholic. I think as I'm getting older, I'm admitting that to myself. I was asked in an interview recently, where's your happy place? And without missing a beat, I said, my desk. And actually my husband and adult son, were in the audience. They're like, maybe. And then they sort of said, is there anywhere else? And then I said, oh, my yoga mat, which, can I tell you, that's not what my family were hoping for. So I have always been a person who feels she needs to prove herself. I mean, it's quite interesting. I think a lot of people now say, oh, you oughtn't to try and prove yourself, and you oughtn't to try and push yourself, and you ought to be nice to yourself. I'm quite nice to myself, but I'm nicest to myself when I know I've done something well. And so, yes, I enjoy my work. I'm very disciplined. I worked in advertising, as we mentioned, and they were long, long hours and very difficult deadlines and that sort of thing. So I think I was in the habit of working very long hours. So when I started writing, it didn't seem as though I was suddenly doing more. It just seemed as though I was doing something that I enjoyed more, because that's the other trick. I really do enjoy what I do. As I mentioned, it was something I wanted to do since I was a child. I think I'm living the dream. I'm as lucky as it gets. And I don't mean it's as lucky as it gets if you become a writer. I mean, if you get to do the thing you want to do with your life. So because I am doing the thing I want to do with my life, I think it would be churlish of me not to do it frequently and well. And actually, the advice came pretty early on in my career from my then editor, who said to me, oh, you ought to try and become that author that people turn to in their holidays and just reach for, because there are a number of people across the UK who only, sadly, read one book a year, and they read it on their holidays. She said, you need to be that person that everybody just goes to. So that seemed like sound advice. And since I didn't know anything about the writing trade, I just took that on. And it is interesting because I have written 22 books, and my son turns 22 this year. So I have sort of, done the two things in parallel. And that's been, again, I think I'm quite lucky. I think there's a lot of other careers where there isn't that level of flexibility. I can write whenever, when he was little, whenever he slept. As he got older, whenever he was at school, as he got much older, whenever he was at a party. So, I could work around my family. And I think that's quite a privilege. So I'm very used to just rolling up my sleeves and getting on with it, actually.
How much flexibility is there really, or does your year have a very set structure?
I'm quite structured. I'm a little bit panicked this year because my structure is a little bit wobbly. So I'll tell you what my normal structure is, because we are hoping to resume that next year. Now I come out in hardback and paperback and have launches, significant launches, as say in the US, and other launches, say in Australia, that require, for me to be available and give my time and to promote. I now find that at least 4, possibly 5 months of my 12 are on promotion. And I wasn't expecting that and didn't used to have that. When I started my career, it was very much 10, 11 months of the year you were writing, 1 month editing, and off you popped. It was very much about the writing. Now I think if I also include how much I do on social media, I would say I'm probably 50-50 writing to marketing. Luckily for me, I do have the marketing background. We've talked about the advertising background, but it's not necessarily a comfortable position for every author, but it is part of being a career author and part of being a bestseller. And actually, I do enjoy it. I enjoy festivals. I enjoy talks like this. I enjoy receiving emails and texts and tweets and such from readers. I think it's very flattering that they've committed their time to something I've produced. Therefore, I always respond personally. I don't have a PA that does that. So I do have to structure pretty carefully. I work best in the morning. I write in the morning, and I try and preserve that pretty carefully. I like to write 1,000 to 2,000 words a day. If I do that, I find I can write a novel in 7 months comfortably, including very strict editing and including on one, yeah, actually the year before last, I think, including dumping it at 80,000 words, which was never in my plan. But I did because I thought the viewpoint wasn't the correct viewpoint. So I kept the entire story and structure, but restructured viewpoint, which isn't a case of sort of find and replace, I'm afraid. Did require a lot of work, but manageable. So yes, it's possible. It's all possible.
So given that you've got so much of your year taken up with promotion and writing and yoga, as you just mentioned, um, what sacrifices have you had to make that sort of one a year regime work?
Well, I joke that at the very beginning, when I still had a full-time day job and I was trying to get my debut written, I gave up soap operas and ironing clothes, which I think was about true. They were probably the only sacrifices I made. Um, if I'm really honest, I know I've given up quite a lot of social life. I have. I probably turned down lovely social invitations 5, 6, 7 times a week because I have lovely friends. I have a lot of friends who are women who work from home or are full-time mums. So they might suggest a coffee or a lunch, and I think, oh, that would be lovely, but it's not on my radar. So I think there's that. I think possibly the biggest one, and I've only really admitted this to myself as I've got to the age of 53. I only have one child. And I am not sure how much I would have been able to do. I think we'd be at least one book down if I had more than one child. One child is a joy. He's gorgeous. He's amazing. But it is relatively easy to manage one child. 2, 3, 4, I've seen with friends and family. You are a chauffeur, you are a cook, chief bottle washer, all those things, and that would take priority for me. I know it would. Him taking priority for me was fine because there was only one of him. I think that I don't think I sat there and said, "Oh, I'll sacrifice having a bigger family." I just think there was never a moment where I had enough space to see I could have had a bigger family. If I'm really
Does
honest.
he does he read your books, your son?
No, literally zero interest in me. I mean, that's not true. He has a lot of interest in me as a human being and as his mother, but no real interest in me as a writer. I think that's because my early novels were romances and it just embarrassed him, the fact his mother wrote. I mean, we're using romances euphemistically. They were quite provocative romances. And actually, I spent quite a lot of my life making sure he wasn't that interested. I didn't want him picking them up and being scarred for life. So he doesn't read them, but my nieces do, and lots of my son's friends do, obviously, especially his female friends. And then as I've now moved into thrillers and psychological thrillers, domestic dramas, call them what you will, a lot of his friends, his male friends and his female friends, are reading them. And I think his interest is peaked. But even when I wrote historical and dedicated one to him, he still didn't read it.
Outrageous. Well, let's talk about One Last Secret, which I've got here, and I want to talk about the protagonist, who I assume is this lady floating
Mm.
in the pool on the front. This is your latest psychological thriller, which I absolutely loved. So the protagonist is called Dora. Tell us a little bit about her.
Well, first and foremost, I think I just have to get it out there. Dora is an escort, a woman of negotiable affection, call it what you will. I have read, obviously, a lot of psychological thrillers, a lot of crime books. And I became aware that quite often the sex worker was somebody in the background. If she was still alive, she was faceless and nameless, often sat on somebody's lap or wrapped round a pole. That's if she was alive. Quite often, actually, she was just the dead body in the alleyway. And it bothered me. We're living in a world that's becoming increasingly about looking at different viewpoints, being aware of stories coming from different directions, and also simply for the fun of it, I wanted to do something different to that had been done before me. So I decided to set the novel from Dora's point of view. She narrates it all the way through. She's incredibly audacious. She's a resourceful, resilient, humorous narrator. I hope you find her humorous. But yeah, she's a sex worker. So that was interesting to research. The story is she knows her life choices are dreadful. I don't think anybody would choose to come to this line of work if they had multiple choices. And she's at a stage where something awful has happened to her. So she decides she really will give up this line of work, her profession, and she's going to start afresh with somebody who genuinely does care for her and somebody she genuinely cares for. However, and it was interesting, I noted this when I researched sex workers, she has a sort of self-destruct button, and she is offered one last job and she just can't resist it. Also a little greedy. It seems an easy job and a well-paid job. So she takes on this one last job in a chateau in the south of France, thinking it'd be very simple and straightforward. It's anything but. She walks into, she comes across her past and she realizes that there's no future for her until she really does deal with what the choices she's made in her past. I think that's all I can say, actually.
That's a fantastic plot summary, and without giving away any spoilers, because I know that some of our viewers have got copies of the book, but I'm sure others haven't yet. So I think you've done a fantastic job there. I'm glad you mentioned research, though, because I know you are a very thorough researcher and that authenticity is very important to you, and that you've gone off and worked as a florist in the past to get into the mind of a character and all those sorts of things, which really begs the question with Dora, how on earth did you go about researching her?
How far did I go? Yes, I mean, I have intelligent readers, and I'm not going to insult them with a novel that's not well researched. And I don't know, over the past 22 years, I've written protagonists that might be teachers, police people, investment bankers, etc., work in TV, whatever, the kind of people who read my books. So in all cases, I have spent time shadowing. And I think people mention the florist because I had such a romantic view of being a florist. And after doing it for 2 weeks, I realized that it's just freezing cold in early mornings. And actually, my hands were cut to shreds, but fine. So when it came to One Last Secret, and I knew I was going to be writing about Dora, obviously I haven't been a police person, but when I needed to do police procedure in novels, but I have always talked to police people, and if I'm very lucky, I've been able to escort on in a sort of civilian way, and get a feel for the job. So I knew I had to do the same. So in fact, and we always giggle about it, because I live in Surrey in the UK, in a very nice county. I'm sure many of your viewers and readers are from Surrey yourselves. And it's got a really low crime rate. But if ever there's an awful crime in Surrey, I think the police will look in my direction because of my Google search. Um, I have things like how to get hold of an illegal weapon, which drugs debilitate and how long for. And one of the things I have when I was writing this book relatively recently researched was, are there escorts in my area? And indeed there are several hundred. And I just contacted them as you can as a punter. It isn't illegal, actually, which was, first of all, news to me. And I reached out to some women and said, I'm writing this novel. This is who I am. You can look at my website. I can send you books to give you an understanding of the tone I will use. Would you be interested in talking to me? Because I'm writing a novel from an escort's point of view. And I would give some came back to me, 3 came back to me very quickly and just said, honestly, if you pay for my time, it's fine. And I guess it is much easier to pay to talk about their job than actually do their job. So, we literally met for coffees, and I asked all the questions I wanted to ask about safety and procedure and law, their fears, their ambitions, how they got into that position, just all the questions I would ask anybody of any profession. I mean, the whole point of this novel is to take away any stigma, I suppose. Obviously, she gets herself into an incredibly awful position because of the profession she's in. I did tell the women the plot summary. The fears that Dora has in the novel are the fears these women have. But yes, it was fascinating talking to these women.
What did you find out that surprised you?
Okay, the fact that they were never shocked about anything. And actually we were out, so it was quite hot, and when I was actually researching this sort of early summer last year, and so we were outside in cafes where I normally would probably, I don't know, have a cup of coffee with my husband or schoolgate mum, and I'm sat with these escorts who are very loudly talking about the different things they do, or are prepared to do, and I was sort of but didn't want to look squeamish or prudish, and didn't want to ask them to keep it down. But there were funny things as well, because actually human beings, we're very complex, aren't we? And the things we want sexually are varied, and that does come up in the book, but also the things we want emotionally are varied. And interestingly, these women appear to answer emotional needs and seem to be a little bit more aware of that than perhaps even their clients are. So that was interesting. I think the other thing I found interesting is there's such a range. I think we all think of sex workers as somebody who has full-on intercourse. That's certainly what I thought. Sex workers can be somebody who sells their socks, which is astounding that there is a market out there. But apparently there's a market out there for relatively young girls, sort of, late teens, 18, 19-year-old girls, to send people their socks that they've worn, which doesn't bear thinking about. We probably should move on.
The mind boggles. Did you find that you were having any of your own judgments, I guess, or misconceptions overturned during these conversations?
Um, I think I'm pretty open-minded, and I go into these interviews trying not to have preconceptions, because then you ask leading questions. And actually, I have another technique that I'll quickly sidetrack and do bring me back to the point. But when I'm writing characters, I interview my characters, which means people I've made up. I interview people I've made up, and I have a whole selection of characters questions that may range from your name and age and sexuality and where do you come in your family, have you got children yourself, have you got a partner, all those basics, but actually get much broader, which might be things like sort of what birth sign are you, and what's your first memory, what's the thing you're most afraid of, what's the thing you're most ashamed of. And I took a lot of those questions to the women that I was meeting, so that I could have a more sort of general character conversation rather than charging straight in on the specifics of the technical detail of their jobs. And I think that was quite helpful. I think it relaxed me, it relaxed them. but yes, I'm relatively open-minded. So I think the range, that I met girls that were sort of fake nails, fake eyelashes, fake boobs, fake bum. And I met girls that were absolute natural beauties that I looked at and, thought, does your mum know what you're doing? Which usually, actually, the answer to that question was twice no and once yes. I asked 3 people that question. So
I'm astounded to hear that you're cramming writing books into a few months every year and you've still got time to write fake interviews with your characters as well. I'm
well, yes, that's
impressed
part
beyond.
of. Yes, actually, I quite often do that when I'm at the process of, when I'm in the stage of promoting. So I will think about a book for 4 or 5 months before I actually start writing. In fact, I think of several books. I usually have, I don't know, say 10 ideas. I quite quickly, within a few days, narrow it down to 3. And then over a period of weeks, those 3 will shake out, and then I will interrogate one idea. And that's usually part of the process when I'm also promoting the last book, because there's actually a lot of dead time in between promotion. There's a lot of time on trains and aeroplanes and that sort of thing. So yes, it is all about this sort of structure and discipline and compartmentalizing. I'm a very good compartmentalizer.
Mm. So some of the things that Dora experiences in the novel,
Mhm.
without giving too much away, abuse, gaslighting, sexual violence, they're pretty tough to read. And I imagine they must be pretty tough to write as well. And she's treated very badly by most of the men she encounters. How emotionally caught up in all of that do you get when you're writing it?
Well, apparently I'm horrible to live with. I mean, I think that's true. I think early doors in my career, when I wrote romances, and the whole point of the book was to offer people a sort of solace through a relatively reassuring, you will find your happily ever after. I was chirrupy. Very chirrupy, as I would be writing the sort of last 20, 30,000 words of that novel and dashing towards that happy ending. And that's what I believed in. And that's where my mindset was. But you know what? As I got older, I also became aware that I felt I was selling a duff there, because life is more complex. And I actually do believe people have happily ever afters. And I am a very positive human being. But I think we have to work quite hard at them. And they don't often come from another person, they often come from within. And that sort of mindset seemed to lend itself a little bit more to psychological thrillers, I have found. So when I'm writing things like Dora's experiences, I mean, bear in mind, and I can't give any spoilers, I do know what's going to happen to everybody at the end of the book, and I'm a plotter and a planner, so I do know the end of my book when I begin. So I may find some solace in that I know the direction it's going in. Also, I'm not 100% certifiable. I know I'm making this stuff up. But because, as I mentioned, it is based in research. It is, I touch on things that are statistically true. So you do have to look at a rather sad part of our society and a darker part of our society. I think how I keep that in, I mentioned that I'm not great company when I'm in the very depths of something dreadful. Perhaps I try and not be gratuitous when I'm writing. I do try and balance it with humor, because I don't want it to be an endurance test for my readers at all. I can't read that type of book personally. I want people to come out with a sense, perhaps, of a level of justice or resolve at some level. But I do balance it with trying to find a level of honesty that I think is important. And I think I write to make connections. So obviously, I don't live the life Dora lives, but I do hope that many, many, many of us, obviously, let's hope none of my readers live the life Dora lives. But I do hope when they read the book, they will still be able to empathize with her and sympathize with her. And if that happens, then that's such an overwhelmingly positive thing and that connection being made through reader and reader and reader and writer, then that's worthwhile. And any sort of slightly dour moods I might have are worth enduring, because that's just being good at your craft.
I think that absolutely comes over in the reading. And you mentioned justice. I was actually going to bring up revenge because I feel like that's a theme that runs through several of your books, and it certainly does through this one. And I wonder whether you've ever sought revenge in your own life.
Do you know, I'm the least vengeful person ever. I let things go all the time. I think I think revenge can ruin your life. And actually, I think I never write to teach. I write to primarily to entertain, and I hope to perhaps, as I mentioned, increase empathy. But I definitely don't sort of write to give a lesson in life. I think my readers are very clever human beings that will be drawing their own lessons. But all that said, I think revenge, personally, I think you can waste a lot of your own life on revenge. And I think the best revenge of all is living well. And I've never sought, I think, I think this is absolutely true. I try and say truthful things, especially ones that are being recorded and can bite me. I don't think I've ever done an actively mean thing in my life. I mean, I'm sure I have done mean things inadvertently. I'm sure I've offended. I'm sure I think I've broken hearts, and I'm sure I've disappointed, and because I'm human. But I genuinely go out of my way to do the kind of thing, and I don't feel vengeful. And it's not because I'm holier than thou. It's because I have seen people wrapped up in bitterness, and I've realized that actually that spoils their lives, and the person they feel bitter towards really is clueless. So it's such a pointless self-destructive act that actually it's almost an act of arrogance that I refuse to be vengeful, or refuse to be mean, because I just think I'm looking after myself by not entertaining either concept. So I don't know how I'm so twisted in my books. Maybe I get it all out there.
Well, it does make it very interesting to me that this sort of lack of a mean streak exists in you and your writing. I mean, you mentioned before that Dora is a flawed character, as many of your female characters are. You know, she's got a self-destruct button. She does some terrible things, and it makes it very interesting that perhaps you're getting it out on the page. Do you think that's the case? Your Jekyll and Hyde moment.
Well, I do need to add, I'm also a very flawed human. I'm just flawed in a different way. Yes, I'm quick to temper. I'm impatient. So I have lots of other things, but vengeance. I'm quick to temper, but I'm quick to forgive. So I'm one of those people. So I have a lot of flaws. I'm very, I suppose, because I am very forgiving. I'm very accepting of people's flaws. But also, I'm not a sort of fool me type. I'm sort of, fool me once, silly you, fool me twice, silly me. That is I don't waste time on people. I move on quite ruthlessly, actually. I don't look back. I think that's part of me not wanting vengeance, is I just don't waste any time. I just cut people off. I just think, right, fine, move on. So I don't bother if somebody's hurt me, or caused me pain, or somebody in my family has caused, if somebody's caused my family pain, I don't bother going back to hurt them. I just move on and think, okay, I don't need you in my life. There's a lot of lovely people out there. So I have my own flaws. I don't want to come across as I'm not Mother Teresa, far from.
There's a quote for the evening. we, we've talked about flawed characters, but you also write, and I mentioned earlier some of the things that Dora goes through in the novel. You do write and don't shy away from writing about some of the most painful things that women can experience in life. Is that something that's personally important to you?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, I write about some of the most painful things anyone can experience, not just women. This book happens to be about lots of women's experiences. A book, for instance, I wrote, Lies, 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 was about from the viewpoint of a male alcoholic who ends up in prison, and that was very dark and difficult to write. And it was very much a male point of view, and almost the problems he got himself into were specifically because he was a man. And interestingly, Dora's problems are specifically because she's a woman. I think there are problems that we all as humans have that are exasperated by our gender and the stereotypes behind our genders, and what society expects of us because of our genders. So yes, I want to tackle those subjects. I don't want to write fluff. So again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's a lot of discussion in this book around motherhood, for example, and what makes a good mother, what will equip you for that, how you can be supported in that, or if you're not equipped and you're not supported, how dreadful you might be at that, and what are the consequences of you lacking in those skills. And so yes, you mentioned gaslighting and abuse and beatings. I mean, let's be honest, beatings and in fact murders, etc., even though quite often psychological thrillers, etc., quite often start on a female dead body. Sadly, sadly either way, but statistically, more men get murdered than women. So it's not a monopoly on female pain. There is pain across humanity, and yes, I look at it, and I think it's important that we look at it. I think it helps us heal. I think it helps us to understand each other's pain. I mean, we all get one life, but if you're a reader, you get hundreds of lives, possibly thousands, and you get that opportunity to see things from different points of view. And, vast majority of us would not want to experience anything like Dora. Well, nobody would want to experience what Dora's experienced. Vast majority of us, thank goodness, never have. But I don't think it harms to understand somebody who has experienced her world.
I think that's beautifully put. I would like to talk about plot twists because in the reading of One Last Secret, I think I counted at least five big ones anyway. Maybe there are more. Each one was just as surprising as the last. And this is something I'm just looking at our reader questions. Thank you for submitting those and do continue to. But there's a lot of interest in your plot twists. How many of those do you plan out? You said you planned the ending in advance. Have you planned all the twists as well?
I've usually got a good 3 up quite clearly planned, and they are my beats, and I definitely always know my ending. It was a very early advice that if you know where you're going to end up, every word will work harder. And I have found that to be true because my plots are twisty turny and there are a number of reveals and rug pulls. And again, going back to this point that I absolutely respect my readers. I don't want them to get to the end and say, well, that's ludicrous. That absolutely couldn't have happened. Where did that come from? I want them to get to the end and say, oh my gosh, that was staring me in the face. Look at the Easter egg she left me. And actually, there's a little bit of fun as well because some of readers will get all of the twists. Some of them will get some of the twists. Some of them will get none of the twists. Some of them will actively read thinking, I don't even want to work it out. I just want to see what happens. We all read in a different way and get different measures of joy out of those different experiences. But for me personally, I like to have, I definitely like to know the end. I like to have 2 or 3 big twists so that people think, oh, well, that's it. That's the twist. There, she's there. And then there might be something else. But actually, sometimes even I'm surprised when I'm writing because I think the characters start, which always makes it sound slightly odd, but the characters do start to take over somewhat. Their voices begin to take on a little world of their own, and they will challenge something I might have planned for them and sort of say, well, you can't get me over to that country that quickly, or why wouldn't I be there? I would have turned up now. I care for the X character enough to turn up. Or so there are things that sort of present themselves to me that I realize I have to solve. if I'm going to stay true to my characters. And therefore, I'm sometimes surprised by a few twists as I write them.
When you're writing, what are you hoping for the reader? Are you hoping that we will be surprised by every twist, or are you hoping that we'll actually sniff out a couple of them and then maybe a
I
couple of
really
them we
don't
won't?
mind. I really don't mind. Um, I'm genuinely only hoping that you enjoy it. I really am. I want I want people to finish the book and think it was well written. I want people to think when they finished, gosh, I hadn't seen that before, or I haven't thought about that before. I have written in several different genres. I've written now, I think, 7 psychological thrillers. Every single one of them has very different themes, very different characters. I constantly challenge myself. I don't want people picking it up and going, I've read this before, or, oh, I've got that mixed up with somebody else's because they're all sort of the same. I really don't want that. Other than that, I don't mind. I don't mind if they guess my twist or they don't. And I do get readers getting in touch and saying, I didn't see it coming, or I did see it coming. And either which way, I say, well, I hope you enjoyed it, and that's all that matters to me.
We've got a few questions in from our viewers, and one of them is a brilliant question from somebody who hasn't left their name, but it's about twists. And they've asked, are you good at guessing the plot twists in other authors' books?
Yes. I am. It's my job. And actually it's quite a saying I don't care if they guess or not. It's actually quite fun if I hear from another author, particularly in the same genre, that they didn't guess my plot twist, because I realize that it's their job too. So they will be rooting out in a particular way. I'm rather sad that I do get plot twists, because it's sort of taken away a little bit of the fun of reading for me, and reading is my first passion. So if I come across a book where I didn't see it coming, I'm always delighted, and sort of doff my cap to that author.
Somebody else has just asked, actually, have you read a book that made you think, oh, I wish I wrote that?
I rarely think I wish I'd. Well, I never think I wish I'd written it, because if somebody else has written something that blows my mind, which people often, you know, often enough do, um, I am just delighted that they've done all the work and I've been entertained. But there are books that I can genuinely say, well, I didn't see that coming. And so one of them is Joanne Harris, Gentlemen and Players, which I read, well over a decade ago. And I didn't see the plot twist coming, and I absolutely loved it and had to write her a sort of gushy fangirl letter. Another one that I've read more recently is by an author called Gillian McAllister, and hers is called Wrong Place, Wrong Time. It's not a plot twist, but the construction is incredibly different for anything I've ever seen. And actually, I did guess. She was really disappointed because she said, "Did you tell me when you're guessing things and send me your thoughts through?" And I was sort of sending, going, "Well, I think this is going there." And she was like, "Stop it now." But I said to her, "No, it doesn't matter that I've guessed, because I'm so thrilled with the structure and how, which was very, very different." So I just, yes, I do look out for the plot twists, but I still love it when someone presents something either beautifully written or structurally different, or a theme I haven't considered myself, and I'm as excited as the next person.
I've just got a question through about the your books that have been optioned for television, which is incredibly exciting. Can you tell us a little about that and how involved you are and what stage it's all at?
Well, if you'd asked me in February this year, I'd have said, I'm so involved. I'm on Zoom calls to Hollywood pretty much daily. And I was. And then I found it utterly exhausting. And I realized it wasn't the industry for me, and I was going to leave it to the experts. So I do have, I think at the moment there's 5 optioned, and they're all at different states of development. Some are being cast, some have got scripts, some are, we're still playing with the sort of overview, some have been pitched. Um, I have realized, I thought writing and publishing was a slow process. No, that crown goes to film and TV, which is so slow. And then I think apparently, according to my friends who've lucky enough to have options that have come into fruition and they've seen their TV and films made. Apparently, once it's greenlit, everything's go and it's super fast. I'm definitely in that sort of slower stage at the moment where I keep being told, so and so is really passionate about it. They'll get back to you in a month. And you think, gosh, they can't be that passionate. It's taking them a month. But then you understand that actually they're on set and they're filming something else and they have to consult with, I don't know, 10 PR people to decide which project to take next, all that sort of thing. And there's so many people involved. Um, I love writing because whilst I love this side of it and reaching out to my readers and I love live events as well as Zoom events and talking to people. Also, secretly, I quite like the peace and quiet of just being at home on my own for hours and hours and hours in my head. And film and TV is the exact opposite. Everybody has meetings all the time, and there are hundreds of people involved. And I never know who's doing what or who we need to get to agree to what. So I find it mystifying. So it's a bit of fun. And don't get me wrong, if it ever happens, I will be thrilled and crowing and annoying about it. But at the moment, I'm just kind of letting them get on with it while I put my head down and finish next year's novel.
That's so fascinating, that kind of now, now, now. I'm sure that must be from your advertising background. And I mean, to me as a journalist, that also sounds quite infuriating. Do you think if any of them really then start to take on a more serious shape, you'll get back involved and you'll be flying out to Hollywood to be on set? What a thrilling
I,
thought.
I I would love to be on set. I think that is the thrilling thought. I mean,
Hmm.
interestingly, all along, the involvement was only ever sort of advisory, and I agreed that up front. I didn't want to be a scriptwriter, and I don't want to be a scriptwriter. I haven't. So before I became a novelist, I must have read tens of thousands of books. I think I've read 20 scripts in my lifetime. So I do not feel qualified or informed or skilled enough to be a scriptwriter. So there was never sort of the option. I never suggested the option of me being involved at that level. But yes, I would very much like the glamour of turning up if somebody fabulous and famous was bringing one of my characters to life and sitting and sort of chewing the fat with that person. That would be marvelous. Who wouldn't enjoy that?
One of our viewers has just asked who you can imagine playing Dora on screen.
Hmm. Somebody said I'm very bad on actors' names, but the woman who played in Killing Eve, what's her name?
Oh, Jodie
Um,
Comer.
yes, somebody said her. I thought she would be good.
Yes,
Yeah, she
she
would be
would be
good.
good.
Mm,
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. Well done, that person.
yes.
We've got some great questions. Thank you, everyone, for sending them in. One of our viewers has asked, this is on a slightly different note, but I haven't asked you for any advice yet on being a writer. And one of our viewers says their teenage daughter would like to become an author. What tips
Mhm.
can you give her as a teenager to start thinking about that or making that happen now?
Okay, very first thing is she needs to constantly read. And I know that sounds silly, but you really need to be passionate about the words on the page and read a load of things that you think are good, read a load of things that you think are rubbish, and develop your own sort of thoughts and opinions on that because that will help you develop a voice. Um, I did an English degree. I don't think you have to take an English degree. I think you probably have to see a bit of life. I didn't get published till I was 30. Nowadays, you can take creative writing courses. There are a number of incredibly good ones up and down the country, and particularly creative writing and publishing courses. And I would suspect that's a really big helpful in because you will, as part of the course, you will more likely meet agents and publishing houses, and you'll get more advice on actually how to make a long career out of becoming a writer. Because yes, I write novels, but I also write um, lifestyle pieces. I write short stories. I write a column of reviews. I write all the time. So that's the other thing. She ought to put a little portfolio together because she needs to be writing all the time and she needs to want to do it to the point of it almost agitates her if she's not doing it, which is a little bit like people who are addicted to exercise. I always feel a little bit agitated if I haven't written that day, and it would be very good for her to get into that practice. Largely keep the faith. It's a long and tricky ride. She'll need a thick skin and a thin skin at the same time. You need a thin skin so you're very open to possibility, open to other people's mindsets and thoughts and feelings, and you can pick up on those and you're able to express those and play them back in a way that other people understand. But you also will need a really thick skin because you will be rejected several hundred times in life. Even if that's just, in a bookshop when somebody's picking up your book and looking at it and then they put it down again because it's not for them. So you just support her in her dream. If she wants to be a writer, it really can happen, and just tell her it can happen. I think that about young people, whatever their dream is. Please tell them it can happen. Don't tell them it can't happen, because who knows? We live in a incredible country, actually, for possibilities becoming probabilities and then realities. And we talk our country down. I think there is people talk our own country down a lot, and I think that's a shame, because one of the things we have is I certainly benefit from an incredible upwardly mobile opportunity is there. Go and take it. So pass that on to her.
I think that's wonderful advice, and I completely agree with you about the need to just write. I mean, I don't pretend to be able to give anywhere near as good advice as you can. 21 books to go, but that somebody once said to me, you want to be a writer. Well, are you writing? And I know that you, even when you were, in advertising, you were writing every single day. And you're right, that is how you hone your voice, and it becomes almost a reflex, and you understand process. And I think that's really wonderful advice. I heartily second that.
Carry a laptop
Talking
or
of
a
writing,
notebook around. Sorry.
no, no, no. Talking of
I was
writing,
just going to
I
say,
know you.
always carry a laptop or notebook with you, and always be scribbling. Yes.
Now, talking of writing, I mean, I know you hinted earlier that this year's writing process hasn't necessarily gone to plan, but presumably you're on book 23?
I am usually, so my deadline is the end of September, so we're fine. But usually I complete my books by the end of June. And I just like doing that before I launch so I've just sort of got it clear, and I think, oh, there it is, and it's sitting in my, well, it's quite often sitting in my editor's inbox, and she takes the first 2 weeks of July on holiday, and we're all very aware of this. But this year, because there was a very big launch, and so December there was a paperback launch, January there was an American launch, then the hardback of One Last Secret. There's been a lot of other things to do. So I'm now at 80,000 words. Literally today, I hit the 80,000 word mark, thank you, which means I have about 20,000 words to go. Obviously, I know where I'm going, but I need some absolutely clear time to put my head down and get on with it. And in my mind, that starts next week. I had a big read through last weekend. I read it aloud to my husband. It's part of the
Oh,
process we've always done. I usually do that at 75,000 words, sort of 3/4 of the way through. I read it aloud, pick up the strands, remember where I'm going with it, which questions I haven't answered. Characters say things that you think, have I answered that? Has she had a resolve? Has he had his resolve? And then I sort of put it all together. So I did that last weekend. And then this week did 5,000 words of sort of quite tight writing. And then next weekend, for the next sort of 5 weeks onwards, I will do the next 20,000 in a rush. And I'm not in a rush the way I did the terrible mistake of the first book, in a rush in a good way, where I keep involved in that book and don't think of anything else, sort of don't have a social life, I actually behave like a student, really. I exist on, I don't know, Red Bull and cheese sandwiches. It's very unhealthy. And I go for it. And then I will come up for air. I will do a final little self edit and get that in by the end of September.
is it another psychological thriller?
Yes. In fact, it's
Oh,
the sequel to Both of You, which was last year's novel.
ah. Oh, so revisiting those characters, that's exciting.
Mhm. It is.
Is there,
It
I
is.
mean, you mentioned you've written historical fiction, you've written love stories, you've written thrillers, you've written romantic comedies. Is there a genre you've got a longing to tap into that you haven't addressed yet?
No, there's nothing. I mean, I think there's only sort of sci-fi left, and I'm really not a sci-fi fan. Interesting, when I met my husband, he knew I was a writer, and he said, "Oh, what do you read?" And I said, "Oh, I read anything. I'm very open-minded, literary works, memoirs, genres, and I read all the genres. What about you?" And he said sci-fi, and I went, "Oh no, no, I don't like sci-fi," which was a very funny moment because I realized I had my own quiet little prejudice. But yes, I think I will be doing psychological thrillers for a while. I don't I never set out thinking, "Oh, this is the genre I'm writing in." Well, obviously in historical I did. I knew where I was setting it. But largely I set out thinking, "This is a story I want to tell. Oh gosh, look, that makes this book a romantic novel. Oh, it makes this book a psychological thriller. Oh, that makes this book a historical novel." I think I'll be doing psychological thrillers for quite some time. I find them intellectually the most challenging. Well, historical novels were intellectually very challenging because the research was fascinating. I set two in World War I, and I learned so much and built such respect for that whole generation. Um, but in terms of the fun of actual words on the page, I think it's, for me, it's psychological thrillers, and so for my foreseeable future, that's where I'm going to dwell.
You did just mention memoir. Do you think you would ever write a memoir?
No. I can't imagine I'm that interesting. I mean, genuinely, as I've pointed out, all I do is write. So there's not much to me. No, I can't. I mean, never say never. Maybe when I'm 100, there'll be something. I don't know. Um, no, I think it would become quite repetitive because I have a process. I write my novels, I launch my novels, I do marketing. That's not the same as people who climb mountains or find cures for terrible diseases. I have quite a small place in the world, really. So I don't think it would sell. I don't think it would be a viable proposition for my publishers.
Oh, I don't know. I think we should hold you to that, that when you're 100, you'll write your memoir, and it can be book number
Okay, I will.
66 or whatever you're on by then. I'm sure we'll all absolutely love it. I'm looking at my clock and we're past 8 o'clock. So, Adele Parks, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for joining us and for being such a good sport and giving us such honest and open answers. And I know a lot of you have read or have got a copy of One Last Secret already, but if you haven't, do buy it. We've got a code that you'll receive tomorrow, along with a survey to let us know how you found this evening. But you'll also get a 20% off code for Telegraph books, so you can buy it yourselves. And do remember to keep an eye on the Telegraph Extra website for more subscriber offers and events. But to everyone watching at home, I hope you enjoyed this evening. To Adele, thank you so much for your time. It's been a total pleasure to speak to you. And good night, everybody.
Thank you, Claire, because you've done a wonderful job. And thank you, everybody, for joining tonight.